We are live. Hello, friends. I, Sarah Rahaman Shaikh, project lead for the Story Project 14 by www.tellmeyourstory.biz, welcome you to the fourth episode of Echoes and Whispers series. It intends to explore various noises and conversations emerging from our internal and external hemispheres. Tell Me Your Story calls for submissions on the theme, inviting people to interpret it in their own creative ways. Registrations are also open for a host of workshops for new or aspiring authors. This evening or morning, depending on your respective time zones, I am extremely privileged to have with us today Dr. Jeffery Long, K. Hari Kumar, and Utkarsh Patel. Tonight, we are going to discuss the fascinating intricacies about spirituality, conversations with God. Let me begin with introducing our first panelist of the panel discussion, Dr. Jeffery Long. Dr. Jeffery Long is a professor of religion, philosophy, and Asian studies at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania, where he has taught since receiving his doctoral degree from the University of Chicago Divinity School in the year 2000. He has written many books and articles, including the award winning Hinduism in America, A Convergence of Worlds, and has also spoken at the United Nations. Welcome, sir. We are immensely delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Namaskar. And thank you for inviting me here.
Namaskar. Our second panelist of the session is author K. Hari Kumar. Author Hari Kumar is a distinguished Indian author with an impressive track record of being one of India's top horror writers. His stories, rooted in Indian folklore and mythology, have captivated readers across the nation. He is also a screenwriter, and his popular works include Daiva, Dakma, and also Brahm, which is a web series, and many more. Welcome, sir. We are truly glad to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me here and looking forward to this wonderful discussion.
Our third panelist is author Utkarsh Patel. Author of several books on mythology, Utkarsh Patel teaches comparative mythology at the University of Mumbai. Besides other institutes like FTII, Pune, and Symbiosis School of Liberal Arts, and many more. He conducts workshops and lectures on the subject both online and at local venues. He is also called upon regularly to be a part of panels that discuss mythologies of the world, epics, and many aspects of Indian mythology and folklore. He is a TEDx speaker where he has spoken on mythology and feminism, a case for subaltern narratives and management and mythology. His books include Shakuntala the Woman Wronged, Satyavati, Kalnaki's Anklet, an epic from the south of the Vindhyas, and Indra, the rise and fall of a hero. Welcome, sir. We are immensely pleased to have you with us today. Sir, you are muted.
Yeah, as I said, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure being here.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to take the opportunity to proceed with the first common question of our panel discussion. During moments of critical decision making or in times of emotional crisis, many of us seek guidance from a higher power, often turning to God for support and wisdom. Would you please like to share a personal story about a time when you deeply engaged with your faith, had a meaningful conversation with God, and how this divine dialogues influenced you to make an impactful and positive decision? Tell me your story. Jeffrey, sir, you may begin first.
Well, thank you. I've had a number of such occasions in my life and on a fairly regular basis, I think. But in terms of coming to God, coming to spirituality through a crisis, I think the most significant one in my life happened in my childhood. And when I was 12 years old, my father passed away. This was preceded by a long ordeal. He suffered an injury when I was 10. And so our family really went through a major crisis. And as good fortune would have it, I had a resource to help me through that experience. Just a couple of years before my father's accident, I grew up in the Catholic tradition, and in a small town in Missouri, in India they would call it a village, right? A gram. It was a very small town, and we were too small to even have a Catholic school. So in the summers, there were nuns from St. Louis, larger city. They would come and teach us. And I remember asking one of the nuns, I had a question, I had a doubt, and I said, why is it that we pray, we speak to God, but God doesn't speak back, right? It's not like the Bible where God is talking to Moses or something. Why don't we experience that? And she gave an answer that I didn't expect. I expected something like the fairly typical Catholic answers. Oh, you're not praying hard enough, or it's a test, or something like that. But what she said when I asked, why doesn't God speak to us? She said, if you listen very carefully, he does. And I was very moved by that answer, right? Because this is something I could test, right? I had sort of a more scientific outlook, I would say. So I started testing it, and I would pray when I would have, especially some problem or some issue, and then I would do what I called listening. Now today I call that meditation, and I know much more about it. But at that point, I was just quiet my mind and listen. And what I discovered was that it worked. No special effects, no booming voice from the sky or anything like that. But either during sitting and listening, or sometimes shortly after, maybe later the same day or a few days later, the answer to my problem would just appear. And it had a particular quality. It felt as though I was remembering something that I already knew and had forgotten. The answer, when it would appear, would seem very obvious, and I would wonder why I had been so perplexed about that issue or that question. And it never felt to me, this isn't very scientific, but the feeling I had was not that I had generated this answer myself. I could tell the difference between this process and my own intellect solving a problem or thinking about a problem. And so I've had a number of occasions. This listening, this meditation process was very helpful to me during the years with my father's injury. But a specific incident I can tell you that was more recent. I was having a conflict with a colleague, and I won't go into it. It was complex, but there were bad relations between me and this other person. And so I took the problem in prayer to I meditate now twice daily, and so I took this question to my meditation, and a very powerful, loud, and clear voice in my mind said, "Make peace." And I rebelled against that. I said, "Oh no, but this person has done this, they've done that, they've said this, like." And then it came again more insistently, "Make peace." So I said, "Okay, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do." So what I did was the next time I encountered this colleague, I sort of put down my mental defenses. I said, I'm just going to treat this person like I treat everyone else. I'm going to smile. I'm going to ask how they're doing and just be what I would consider normal and not carry all that baggage of that conflict with me. And what I found was that person responded beautifully, just acted in a very normal way. And forever after, that conflict just dissolved. We never resolved it. We never talked about it or brought up the issues that existed between us. They just became irrelevant. And I don't think this would have happened unless I had gone through this meditative process. So that's just one example, but it was a fairly dramatic one because it was one of those occasions where rather than a kind of a vague sense or feeling, it was like a very clear, like words in my mind, make peace. So this came from somewhere, right? And I guess the last thing I'll say, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, is that one question I sometimes have, and people have also posed to me, how do you know this is God? How do you know it's not some voice from your own unconscious mind? But the thing is about the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta is that those two are not mutually exclusive, right? If we are that, right? If aham brahmasmi, right? If the divinity is within us, then that's really not a meaningful distinction. Is it from God or is it from me? Yes. This is what I now believe.
Thanks a lot, sir. That's very inspiring, very intriguing. Uh, Hari, sir, please, over to you now.
I'm very much interested to hear what Utkarsh has to say because we had a very interesting conversation last year. Anyway, I'll also talk about something very recent. So while writing Daiva, so Daiva is my latest book, and there was a lot of research that went into that particular book. And this book is about the spirit deities of southern Karnataka, and mostly they are folk deities. And the thing is, there were not uh, enough written material about this form of worship. Whatever was there was either written in Kannada, which I couldn't read. I can read Malayalam, Hindi, I can read English, but Kannada I couldn't read. And whatever was there in English was written 140 years ago by these British writers and Basel missionaries. And so, and almost all the stories of these spirit deities, they are in the form of folk songs that were never written down. So it became extremely difficult for me to, to gather information which I could use for my book. And there came a point when uh, I kind of thought of giving up. And this was last year in February or March 2023. I was almost on the verge of giving up. I was in a village like Jeffrey mentioned, a village in southern Karnataka. Not even a village; it was a hamlet, like a very small halli is what we call it in Kannada. And there I was at my wife's ancestral home, unable to find any leads because I was trying to reach out to experts who are from the region, who are performers of this particular form of worship. But I wasn't getting any positive response from anyone, and I gave up. I was like, no, I'm returning. I mean, I'm canceling this contract. This cannot happen because I'm not getting anything. So at that time, my wife, who comes from the region, who worships one of these spirit deities at her ancestral home. Uh, in fact, even my ancestors, they used to worship this like 5 generations back, but we migrated to Kerala, so we kind of left that thing behind. So my wife told me, just go to the prayer room. The deity's idol is there. Light a lamp, close your eyes, and pray and ask because the people of that region, they, and the language spoken there is Tulu, not Kannada, and in Tulu we call them Satyulu. Satyulu means the truth, Satya. So she was like, just pray to Satyulu. There is Satya Devata in the room. Just close your eyes and pray, light a lamp, and ask them to show a way, and let's see what happens. If still nothing happens, just leave it and let's go back to Pune and work on something else. And I don't know. I mean, that day I prayed a lot. I mean, not as in not like for an hour or something, but I prayed kind of deeply. And within an hour, I get a response from a local person who heard from somebody that a person from Pune, a writer from Pune, has come to their village to, looking for resources. And he was willing to help me, and he was willing to take me to local ceremonies and folk rituals. And then suddenly, slowly and slowly, things started happening. And I also found some very old books written by scholars, Indian scholars, in the 80s and 90s, which were more relevant to the spirit worship. And then, I don't know, I mean, I wrote the book. And this came at a time when I was also struggling with a very bad case of lower back pain. And Utkarsh ji knows how tall I am and how much of a pain it is when you start getting that shooting pain, in the back. So everything vanished. I was going from village to village, attending, these rituals that last for the entire night. And I was not facing, and no chairs, nothing, simple plastic chairs, no luxurious hotel rooms. I was sleeping on the floor wherever I got a room, and I don't know, something otherworldly or something very powerful helped me. So that was my very recent experience, and the book is now out there, and so yeah. Now, I mean, again, it could be like Jeffrey said, it could be something in the subconscious. It could be my determination because I wanted to write it and I wanted to know what my ancestors used to worship, because these are not most of these deities are not your Puranic deities, they are from the folklore. So maybe that kept me going. I don't know. I mean, if a rational answer is what you need, then this must be it. But if it's a spiritual answer, then there might have been a higher power which was leading you. An inner voice.
Yes.
It just said, go on, just go on. It'll happen.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Like
Yes, now
these
I'm
little
waiting for
miracles is what gives us somewhere hope of that
maybe.
spirituality,
Yeah,
that
it
supreme
definitely
power.
gives hope, and it
Somewhere
gives
being
hope to
there,
the
maybe.
people as well. A lot of
Exactly.
people find hope there. Yeah.
Utkarsh sir, over to you now.
Honestly, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I must add the fact that these experiences cannot be explained rationally, and it doesn't need to be. One really doesn't even need to explain it to anybody. It's something that's very, very personal. And as I said, what I say or what you say or what Hari says, if somebody doesn't believe or if somebody is unable to relate to it, so be it, right? Because it's solved your problem, it's helped you, and that's just about it. And only thing is, I just want to add that that this is very different, this is very personal, so it cannot be generalized either, but that's not important, right? For me, I'll be honest with you, I can't relate to any particular incident, but for me, such conversations have been more self-directed, than with the divine, right? Like as I said, as Jeffrey mentioned, that it could just be an inner voice, right, where you talk to somebody. But in majority of the cases, we often are talking to our own selves, right? We're trying to rationalize it and understand it. So in my case, talking to myself has been quite revealing, and it has often ended up in sort of clarifying things better than what I had started off with, and that helps me kind of see things a little more clearly. Also, I feel that such acts can be quite cathartic if done honestly and frankly, without any worry of who's going to say what, or fear somebody's judgment. If we are honest to the cause, if we are honest to what you intend to do, and if you're really honest to seek an opinion, then I think for me it works that I kind of introspect. I kind of talk to myself and figure it out. So while I respect individual experiences, my experience, if there has been one, is more about kind of self-reflection, kind of with the divine, right? Also, since I teach and write about mythology, the approach to aspects of God and divinity per se is very different for me. For me, mythology is about the times when spirituality and religion, both of which are the results of a much higher evolution of humanity, did not exist, right? I'm talking about times when these two didn't exist. So, needless to say, that both, that is spirituality and religion, have borrowed extensively from mythology, or we can say leaned heavily on mythology. But for me, they're quite different, and so individual experiences per se, I don't have any. I respect everybody's individual experiences, but for me, it's more of looking inward. For me, it's more about conversations with thyself, which helps me get clarity. So that's what I have to say out here.
Lovely. That's so true, sir. Yeah, and it's actually being completely transparent, just like you said a little ago, that it's all about being vulnerable and completely transparent to to this energy. It can be anything. It's very personal. So yeah, thank you, sir. Uh, Now I would like to begin with our Q&A segment. The first question is for Dr. Jeffrey, sir. Sir, in relation to your fascinating book, Hinduism in America, A Convergence of Worlds, how have the Americans adapted their religious practices to fit the diverse and pluralistic environment of the United States? It would be wonderful if you share with us some examples from your research where Hindu Americans describe their personal experience of divine communication and spiritual journey.
Okay, very nice. So this is a wonderful question. So the United States is a very religiously diverse environment, not unlike India in that sense. I mean, we think of these two cultures as very different. They're literally on opposite sides of the globe, and in some ways that almost represents something conceptual too. Like there are many ways in which these two societies are very different, but one thing they have in common is a lot of religious diversity. In both societies, you'll have a dominant tradition. In India, it's the Hindu tradition. In U.S., it's Christianity. But that doesn't mean that either of those is a monolith, right? There's a lot of diversity among Hindus. There's a lot of diversity among Christians, and I think both societies today but I think maybe more so the United States, is really going through kind of a crisis to how to think about that diversity. And I think in India, a lot of the crisis is fueled by historical factors, the relations among the various communities. In the U.S., I think it goes a bit deeper because a lot of the traditions here, theologically, they teach what scholars call exclusivism, right? You have to follow our path, and everything else is wrong, right? Which is a recipe for conflict, right? Because then you are antagonistic to other traditions, or you want to convert them to your tradition, which is also kind of antagonistic, right? That it's at least it's experienced that way if you're on the receiving end of that. So um, people in the U.S., if I can generalize, to some extent, try to use their religious traditions or their spiritual traditions or their practice almost as a refuge from this conflict that's going on. And so, for the majority of Americans who identify as some form of Christian, this very often takes the form of uh, going to church, being part of the community, being very active in the community, and it has a very community orientation. And one observation I'd like to make is that in the U.S., our society tends to be very individualistic. We're famous for that. As a result, people feel a need for community, and religion is often the place that people go for that sense of community and connection. I find India almost the opposite. At the time I spent in India, I lived in India for almost 2 years. I've been back many, many times. My wife is from India. Most of my social network, online and in the flesh, is with people from India. um, it's very community oriented, right? It's not so individualistic. So religion and spirituality almost play the opposite role. That's where you can be by yourself when you're doing puja, when you're doing meditation. I found it when I lived in India, the only time people would not disturb you would be if you were doing some kind of puja or meditation. Okay, let them be. Otherwise, people want to talk to you, people want to engage. It's very, very people oriented. So in the US, it's almost the opposite. So what's happened, I think, is that Hindu Americans, most of whom are of Indian origin, about 90% according to statistics, um, from India and other parts of South Asia, uh, they've sort of adapted to the American model in a sense, where religion and spirituality still has a very individualistic element for Hindu Americans, because your puja, your meditation, what you do at home is really the heart of the practice and the experience. But the community experience is also very, very important, I think, for Hindu Americans, because of wanting to preserve a sense of being part of a community, which in India you can take for granted because it's everywhere. But in the US, Hindus are less than 1% of the population. So if you want to preserve a sense of being Hindu, you have to have a temple, and temples serve much more as community centers here than they do in India. India, you go to temple to do a puja, and that's it. Here, uh, there's Sunday school, believe it or not, this very Christian term, but they're Hindu Sunday schools for the children. That they're learning Indian languages, they're learning Indian dance, music, and because there are a few of us like myself who are not from an Indian background, but who have become part of the community and part of the tradition. You'll have, for example, at our temple, our local temple, there is a white man. He's originally from South Africa, and he's teaching the sitar to students whose parents came from India. And so it's very interesting that he's a white person explaining sitar and explaining ragas and so on to Indian children. And so that's the American experience here. So in terms of how people relate to God, and the deeper point behind the question, I think that for Hindu Americans, in the people I've interviewed, the people I've known, and some of my own experience as well, it still occurs in this very private and personal space of the home when people are doing their puja at home, they're doing their meditation. Though I have had people tell me stories of rather dramatic experiences of darshan as well in temples in the U.S. Right? That these temples have become fixtures now. Some of them have been there since the 70s. Right? That's not ancient like the ones you'll find in India that have been there for hundreds and thousands of years. But some of these temples are very alive, and people have. I've heard many stories of people going to the mandir, going to the temple with some problem or some issue. They have the darshan, and then it sort of resolves itself, kind of like the stories we were just telling. So this is happening in America, and it's interesting because some of these stories are reminiscent of things you would hear in India and take for granted, but they're not what you would kind of associate with the stereotypical American experience. But it's here and it's present, and there are people, again, not even from of Indian descent, who are drawn to that and who will go to temples. I know I interviewed one woman from Michigan who does not identify herself as Hindu, but she goes very regularly to the local temple because that's the place where she feels close to God, more than in the church or other places. So we're very pluralistic. I feel like there's a big giant social experiment happening in America, but that no one is in control of. So we don't know what's going to happen. But that's a few remarks about that.
Thank you, sir. It's truly wonderful that we are embracing each other's culture, and even though we might not like believe it, or we are not term completely Hindu, but still, just because we are able to resonate with it, we tend to just go there for peace, and it's wonderful. Thank you, sir, for sharing your insights. The next question is for Hari, sir. So, Daiva is a wonderful and well researched book that meticulously imparts knowledge about the background of the Daiva deities. I came across a few autobiographical elements that touched on your ancestral connection with Tulu culture and Daiva. It would be wonderful if you share your emotional and personal experience while writing the book. Did this work help you to somewhere embark on a self rediscovery journey? Please elucidate.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, first of all, I just wanted to add something to what Jeffrey had said. I think the entire human existence is in itself an experiment from I don't know, from another dimension, maybe. I don't know. So, coming back to Daiva, so like I mentioned, Daivas are not your typical Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, Parvati kind of gods. They're not your devas. They're not your Puranic deities. Uh, they're different kind of spirit deities. Some of them are from the Puranas, like the attendants of Shiva, who are also known as Bhutas, the Bhuta Ganas. Then you've got your Shaktis, the attendants of the female, the mother goddesses, or the deities who have come from the Prakriti, from the primordial creation force. So there are those, especially those are the ones which come from northern Kerala, and then there are also people who uh, who are either martyrs in wars or who were wronged in their lifetime and who are oppressed, and then their spirits are now worshipped. And most of these folk deities are from the lower strata of the society, from erstwhile lower castes. And in fact, there was a time when these deities were not even, I mean, they didn't, they worshipped in places called sthanas or daiva sthanas, not in your typical Hindu temples. So there's a lot of social as well as cultural significance to all these things. When I grew up in Delhi, okay, in a very metro kind of a household, in a metro culture, and my parents, they were brought up in Kerala, okay. So there was nothing. I mean, we retained our mother tongue, which was Tulu, and the last of my ancestors who lived in Tulu region, they were there some 125 years back. So that's 5 generations ago. They were there, and when they were there, they used to worship these spirit deities, which we don't even know who they are. And for Tulu people, they have their daivas, they have their nagas, and then they have the Puranic gods and Kula devatas and all those things. So these daivas and nagas are very important for the Tulu speaking people. And unfortunately for us, so whenever there is a problem in our lives, what we usually do is we go to this, either we go to our elders or we go to these astrologers or whatever, or we go to these temple oracles. In Kerala, we have temple oracles for Velichapai. And so one such incident happened in my life, and this oracle, who is supposed to be possessed I think Utkarshji knows about Kannagi and the anklet. So they wear this anklet and they get possessed and they carry the sickle and all. And once they are possessed, they become one with the divine. And then they can tell, prophecies, and you can seek solutions to your problems and all those things. So in one such incident, it happened that one of these oracles, and they mentioned that your ancestors used to venerate some spirit deity, and since you guys moved to Kerala, that deity is left somewhere in southern Karnataka. You have to go back and at least find out who it is, or at least venerate the Nagas, and then whatever problems or issues you are facing will be resolved. And I, as a writer, as a seeker, found this very interesting because I've always wanted to know who are my ancestors, what are my roots, and even as a child, I wanted to know about what is God. So that is what led me to this journey where I went back. I inquired from the eldest members of my family as to where we might have come because we don't even know where we came from. So then this journey called Daiva started, and yeah, what I learned in this journey, other than the spiritual aspects, is I got to know about the stories of these folk deities, not just the Puranic deities, but also of these people who were once wronged, who were once oppressed. I think that for me was very eye opening. And these stories you'll find in the book as well.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you so much for sharing such an interesting account. Utkarsh, sir, the question for you I would like to ask that in your book, Shakuntala, the Woman Wronged, please share the parts in which the divine conversations shaped Shakuntala's empowering journey. What today's youth can learn from her story about resilience and inner faith.
Right. Like that my characters of my books are mainly mythical characters. They belong to a very different world, a world where gods or the divine are often a part of the central characters' lives, right? So to have divine conversation is that much tough. But in Shakuntala, the woman wrong, there are quite a few instances, or should I say moments, where the characters question the divine. Okay, like one very pertinent moment is when Shakuntala learns about her parents. She learns that her father Rishi Vishwamitra is alive, her mother Menka kind of exists, or aware of the fact that she's around, but neither of them have bothered to kind of get in touch with her, or speak to her, or help her, despite don't knowing her existence, right? A moment when she realizes that she's the child of lust and not love, and the father blames her for him having deviated from his chosen path, though during the time of the story he was already a well-known stage. I'm talking about the time of the story of Shakuntala. While this can be quite traumatic for someone as young as she was, it only went on to strengthen her will and evolve into a very strong personality. And I think that is a very, very important aspect that I feel about the character. Now, what actually made me write the book was the strength of the character Shakuntala as portrayed by Vyas in the epic Mahabharata. Right? When I talk of Shakuntala, I'm referring to the Mahabharata character Shakuntala, and not Kalidas's Abhigyan Shakuntalam Shakuntala. These are two very, very different, right? And I think the underlying message of the youth today, which I think Vyas was trying to give, and it's still relevant today, that the world hasn't really changed, and majority of the world is still patriarchal. How does a woman stand one's ground, express her opinion even when the world is against her, and still win the day, is I think the message that Vyas was trying to give, and at least that's a message that we should take. And to borrow from the foreword of my book, which was written by the noted scholar Professor Satya Chaitanya, and let me read it from there. And he says that, and I quote, Shakuntala is all that a woman should be: independent, assertive, courageous, and yet endowed with tenderness. Uh, just one second. tenderness, capable of great love, the ability to give oneself unreservedly, to take risks. Through her, we see what Vedic women were, the kind of women any culture in any part of the world at any time can be proud of or should be proud of. Women not crippled by fear, women who knew how to give and receive love and how to fight it if it was called for. These were women who participated in the social, cultural, and spiritual life of their times as equal with their men, who were hungry for life, full of spirit of adventure, passionate and assertive. Unquote. See, it's very, very important to understand that I teach at many places, and often majority of the audience or majority of the students are women. And whenever we are talking about mythology, epics, we're always referring to men as heroes. We seldom have women, and I have had many people asking me this question: how come there are no women heroes? There are. You have to look for them. There are. Well, epics were written by the men, so obviously they have focused on men. So it's important to understand that there are women. It's just that the heroism differs. The act of heroism is very, very different. They don't have to go killing dragons and fighting demons. Their heroism is very, very different. And I think Shakuntala, as a first important female character of Mahabharata, is extremely heroic. She's independent, she's assertive, she stands her right. And there's a very beautiful scene at a point where she walks in, unaided. There's not a single person with her. Walks into the court of Hastinapur, and Hastinapur was a powerful, kingdom at that point of time. And Dushyant was a very, very powerful king. And she stands there and blames Dushyant and blasts that man. Imagine Vyas in those days writing the speech of Shakuntala. I mean, everybody in modern times must read it. So, immense message for people of the modern times as to how to stand your ground despite the world being against you. And I think that is an extremely important message that Vyas has left for all of us. Yeah.
Immensely powerful, sir. Thank you so much for sharing us the scripture and giving such a mind blowing answer. The next question I would like to ask Jeffrey, sir. Would you please like to share with us some example from the Jain texts that illustrate profound dialogues between humans and the divine? And what lessons do these stories impart for contemporary spiritual seekers?
So the Jain tradition, and this is something I've also studied very deeply. I have close connections with the Jain community. And the question of God is very different in the Jain tradition than what we often find in other traditions, because this English word God, which we now sort of generalize to talk about all kinds of divinity in many traditions, typically has the connotation, because of its sort of Western origin, of a creator and an almighty being who is kind of running the universe. And from a Jain perspective, no such being exists. But it would not be correct to call Jains atheists, because there is a strong sense of divinity. But the divinity in the Jain tradition is the jiva, the atman, the soul itself is divine. And the goal of Jainism is to purify that soul, to eradicate the karmic accretions that have attached to it through many, many eons of rebirths, and then finally manifest that fully. And the beings who have done so are really the divinities in the Jain tradition. So the Jinnas, and most recent on our planet being Mahavir from about 2,500 years ago. So in the Jain tradition, the stories one finds are more of an encounter with one or more of the Jinnas, or with the living jiva within one's own self, and through that getting some inspiration, getting some strength that's needed to carry on in the journey. So what is meant by God is very different than in many other traditions, but it is kind of similar to what we were saying earlier, that you can conceive of divinity as something present within your own mind and within your own consciousness. But with that kind of metaphysical or ontological understanding, what I find in the Jain community is something that's very similar to what you'll see in other communities among Hindus, among Christians, and so on. That people will have some crisis, and they'll either go to the temple, or they will go through their own practice of meditation inward and find the answer, right? Find the solution to the problem that they're having. And in terms of particular stories from the literature, there are many such stories. This is not so much part of what I would call the, I guess you could say, the high literature, the official literature of the Jain tradition, which is mainly composed by monastics and is all about asceticism and spiritual practice. But if you look at the folk tales, right, if you look at what ordinary people do, and if you look at the vernacular literatures in Hindi, Gujarati, other languages from the regions where Jainism is prominent, many stories of people, uh, you know, uh, going going to the temple and having some miraculous experience. Right. One particular story that comes to mind is there's a story from Gujarat of there was a temple and the country was being invaded, and so there was a fear that the temple was going to be destroyed. So the murtis were taken and stashed away somewhere. They were actually buried in a faraway place, in a remote place. And then generations later, there was a Jain householder who, but who had very spiritual leanings. And while he was in meditation, he felt an urge to go and look in this remote place. So finally, he gave in to that, and he went and he sort of dug and looked around, and lo and behold, here are these Jinnah images from a couple of centuries before. So they were taken, they were restored, they were put back into the mandir, and I believe the story was from Rajasthan, and so you find things like that, the kind of visionary stories. Stories where people have some kind of inner prompting, and then they, or a dream very often, we have stories of dreams. In fact, probably one of the most famous one in the Jain tradition, the story of Mahavir's mother, who the birth of Mahavir is preceded by 14 dreams on the part of his mother, and she sees in each dream she sees an auspicious sign, and each of these was a representative of the fact that she was going to give birth to the next, the great next Tirthankar, the next great enlightened being. And to this day, when the Mahavir Jayanti, when the birth of Mahavir is celebrated, very beautiful, very ornate um, replicas of these images, these 14 auspicious signs, are set up in the Jain temple. Our local, well, this tells you a little bit more about Hinduism in America as well. Our local Hindu temple is also a Jain temple, and so every year Mahavir Jayanti comes, and you see they have these silver replicas of the various of the 14 dreams of the queen, who is Mahavir's mother, and so that dream experience is celebrated to this day in the community. So even though the metaphysics is different, we're not talking about God as something from outside of time and space. Nevertheless, it's for people's experience. It's very similar to what you find everywhere else.
Thanks a lot, sir, for sharing your insightful and fascinating views. The next question I would like to ask Hari, sir. While writing Daiva, what common beliefs and values are embedded in the hearts of the people when worshipping Daiva deities? What words of deep devotion do they share when praying to the deities? Please share some unique rituals followed under this form of worship.
Yeah, I've already spoken about what are the basic deities that the Tulu people worship in the previous question. So I'll just talk about the rituals, because one of the most striking features or most attractive things about Daiva Aradhana, the worship of of the Daivas, is the dance which is associated with this form of worship, and which many of you might have already watched in that film Kantara. So, in this particular ritual, which goes on from sunset to sunrise, or it could even be from sunrise to sunset, where dancers from a particular community, they take on the role of impersonators. Okay, and what they do is they, in that arena where everybody has assembled, they invoke these spirit deities by using Tulu folk songs called Pardhanas. There are no mantrams, there are no chants or anything. They're not; these are not prarthanas, because sometimes people associate Pardhana with a prarthana. No, these are folk songs. These are folk poems in Tulu language, a language which officially doesn't have a script or a recognition in the Indian constitution, despite having almost 25 to 30, I think, lakh speakers. Anyway, coming back to the point, so these dances, they invoke these spirits or the spirit deities inside them. They even dress up as these deities by wearing these face paints and get-ups. Depending on the type of deity, they could be wearing a sari if it's a female deity. They could be wearing a male attire if it's a male deity. They could even be androgynous deities, male on the upper body, female wearing a sari in the lower body. So it's very unique, very beautiful. Similar concepts are seen in the northern Kerala, and they're called Teyyams there. Teyyam again, it's similar to Daiva. Daiva becomes Daya, Daya becomes Teyyam in Malayalam. So I think that is the most, I think, one of the most beautiful and most colorful rituals that you get to see as part of this form of worship. And even for a person who may not believe in this kind of a worship, they'll still be attracted to at least this dance form, this art form. And what these dancers have done and what these people who are adhering to this form of worship have done is they have kind of carried over these stories from generations past to the present generation without a script. So even today we know the stories of the people who once lived, these folk tales. So that's a very unique aspect. And similar dances are also found in Tamil Nadu. They're also found in Kerala. In fact, these dances, they are believed to have migrated from Tamil Nadu to Kerala. And from Kerala, they moved, some of them moved southwards and the others moved northwards. And then they entered southern Karnataka, where they started using Tulu language for their performances. So I think that's a very interesting and uh, visually unique thing. And when these dances are possessed, at that time they become this divinity for the people who are sitting there. And few hundred years back or few decades back, most of these people didn't have access to the temples. So they were sitting in front of the deity in flesh and blood, which is, and then they talk about their problems, and then they seek help in their, they seek remedies, and they also ask about the future. They ask about, the problems of the village, and then there is I mean, not court dispute, but they solve disputes in the village between families, because it's diverse could be of different forms. There could be the a daiva of a family, very personal kind of a function. It could be the daiva of the village, a grama daiva. So it could be the daiva of a larger area, like a royal deity. And most of these royal deities come from the Jain influence, because Jains were very prominent in that part of the world. And so that's very interesting. And one more interesting aspect, which is what still drives me crazy or makes me curious, is these deities, are they present all around us? Are they present in our realm? Or are they present in some spiritual realm? Because they are invoked from the Akash into the body of the dancer. So, yeah, these are the questions that I'm also trying to figure out answers for. But yeah,
It was a
that's
very
it.
powerful and thought-provoking answer, sir. I actually got goosebumps while hearing you. Thank
You
you
should
so
watch
much.
a performance. I mean, when you watch this ritual, you actually get goosebumps. But again, like Utkarsh you said, it depends on which side you are. Like the book that I was referring to, the first book which I got, which was written in 1872 or something by by this British writers. For them, it was nothing but devil worship.
Yeah.
In fact, that book is called "The Devil Worship of Dunya." Because because when they look at it, they are looking at possession, loud
Yeah.
rituals, fire, which is kind of very pagan, and so Yeah. So that's a perspective.
Obviously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and here we also get to learn something that possession does not has to do with only Saturn and evil. It can
Right.
also be
No.
godly.
So this is voluntary possession.
Hmm.
The one which we see in the movies, like in The Exorcist, that's all involuntary possession. And again, those can also be kind of, looked at in a very rational way, that it's dissociation and all those things. But even here, scholars, they have mentioned that this is also a form of auto-suggestion and self-hypnosis, the voluntary possession. So yeah, whatever
Thank
perspective
you
you
so
want
much.
to choose, you can choose.
True.
Thank you, sir. Next question is for Utkarsh, sir. In Kannaki's anklet, Kannaki's faith and sense of justice drive her actions. How does her spiritual journey negotiate with the themes of faith and feminism? In your opinion, how do the divine encounters of mythological women resonate with the struggles and triumphs of contemporary women?
Well, Kannaki's Anklet was my third book, and quite a contrast from the previous books that I had written, which was Shakuntala and Satyavati, both of which were characters from the epic Mahabharata. A text that has probably the maximum number of strong women found in any other text, right? Kannaki's strength was different. And as I mentioned a little earlier, we tend to judge the strength of our heroes in a similar way. The template is the same: kill dragons, kill demons, set up cities, etc. Right? Kannaki's strength was different from the heroines of Mahabharata. She kind of epitomized the ideal woman, which was as envisaged, during the Sangam period of literature of the times. And that is what we have to understand. We don't judge these characters based on our 21st century sensibilities, right? We all have a different way of looking at it. Our gaze is very different today. But when the author or when the times were narrating these stories, the standards were way, way different, right? So, for example, many modern day feminists have actually criticized her portrayal as a suffering wife, right? When her husband leaves her for his mistress, she's kind of taking care of the in-laws. Husband is sort of selling off stuff from home to for the whims and fancies of his mistress. She is unable to say anything, and at one point of time they're left with nothing, right? And takes her husband back, when the husband comes back, right, after a short stint and losing everything with his mistress. Now that kind of not only accepts him, but even decides to change the city, go start a new life, as they had lost everything. Now this kind of goes against the ideals of feminism as we understand feminism in the modern times. But if we keep that one aspect aside of Kannaki, which is, as I said, a very modern 21st century outlook. But in my opinion, even today, if you step out, even in the outskirts of your city or even in your city, many women make this compromise when their husbands come back, right? It's only a very small percentage who will probably drive their husbands back and said, sorry, not allowed. But majority of them do make the compromise. But if I leave that aspect apart, you know, something which I feel is very, very contemporary, and that is the way she highlights the duty of kingship. And that is very, very critical. See, the epic highlights a very important aspect, and that is a personal transgression can be pardoned, okay, but not that by a king or a public figure. And I think that's an extremely strong message, and it implies that what one does in one's personal space is very, very different and very personal. Overlooking an individual's errors can be a very personal act, right? To pardon one's husband for his misdemeanor is different and something very personal. You can judge that person, but again, the right or the wrong of it, it casts no shadow on anybody per se, or at the society at large. The repercussions for one person is, it's only related to that one single person, the repercussion. But a single error by a king or a leader, who's in a position of influence, has its bearing on the entire community, or people at large. So besides leading to the aspects like miscarriage of justice, it could also end up being a wrong precedent. very clearly people in public space ought to be very careful in their conduct when it comes to decision making of this type, and there can be no scope of an error. And if there is, then there is, serious ramifications to sort of go with it, right? A very, very strong statement I feel that the author has made through Kannagi, and I would think that it is this aspect of Kannaki, which is extremely laudable as an important pointer to leaders of all times, more so in modern times. So once again, I'll just want to reiterate that heroism is not always about winning battles and killing dragons. Heroism is when a woman who hasn't stepped out of her town and she steps out into a big city for the first time has the audacity or has the power in her to confront the king and tell him and prove it to him that there has been miscarriage of justice by him. And thereafter she has it in her to call the gods and order the gods to burn the city down as a punishment, not just to the king but even to the subjects who had wronged her husband. This power of one's conviction is visible here. And whoever says in life, saying what can I do alone, needs to take lessons from Kannaki. She did it all alone in an alien land, in a city, all alone, without the help of anybody and without the help of any weapon. I think that's the power of this narrative. Yeah.
Very empowering, sir, yes. And I do believe somewhere it symbolizes that you can actually, if you really want something, you can do it all alone by yourself. You
Yeah.
don't really need anyone. If you truly want it, you desire it. So, yeah, thank you so much, sir. I think we are almost at the end of our panel discussion, but before that, I would like to take an honor and ask you all to read out a small passage from one of your books for our readers. Please select a portion that explains the conversations with God or the situation that leads to it. Jeffrey, sir, please, you may begin first.
Okay, so this is from Hinduism in America, and it's from the prologue, where I basically describe my own journey, like what drew me to this path, what drew me to this field of study. And I mentioned earlier um, the, uh, the passing of my father when I was young, and that's the context of the passage I'm going to read. At the time of the event, I was 14 years old. Um, I'll just read it. My first encounter with the Bhagavad Gita was in the parking lot of the local Methodist church. I was not a Methodist, but I was in the church parking lot because a flea market was being held there. I'd gone with my grandmother, who was there to sell her handmade arts and crafts. My mission, beyond helping Grandma, was to buy old science fiction paperbacks and comic books, which could often be found at such markets. This was a spring day in 1983 when I was 14 years old, the day I found the book that would change the course of my life. On a table at the flea market that looked like a promising place to find interesting books, I saw the Bhagavad Gita. It was sitting on top of a pile of old magazines. It was the richly illustrated Bhagavad Gita as it is. The Gita is translated by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness and friend and teacher of George Harrison. George Harrison, of course, of the Beatles, and I'm a big fan. I opened the text, seemingly at random, to one of the illustrated plates, a portrait of a man who had died and was surrounded by his grieving family. The picture hit me like a lightning bolt, as it seemed to sum up perfectly the experiences of my family over the past few years. Standing at some distance from this grieving family was a wise sage, gazing upon them with serene, compassionate detachment, and gifted with the ability to see the divinity in each family member, illustrated by a small image of Lord Krishna floating over each person's heart. Beneath this picture was a caption that read, "The wise lament neither the living nor the dead," with a page number given. I looked up the page reference indicated next to the caption and came to the 11th verse of the second chapter of the text. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor the dead. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth and then to old age, The soul similarly passes into another body at death. The self realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. I cannot begin to describe the power these words had for me that day, a power that resonates to the present. It seemed to me as if I was hearing the voice of God speaking directly to me in this Methodist church parking lot. Transfixed, I could not put the book down. Here was the wisdom which I had been seeking. Here were answers that actually made sense to me, both logically and intuitively. I bought the book for a quarter. I always say this was the best quarter I ever spent.
Lovely. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing this. Hari, sir, over to you now.
I think I remember that picture from Bhagavad Gita as it is. And yeah, there were some beautiful pictures in that book. Yeah, so I'll read out from Daiva, and I'm going to read out from the closing paragraph of uh, my book. Through the course of my journey, I discovered that the Satya, far from being mere myths or superstitions, were a lifeline for those who sought solace, guidance, and strength. Their presence resonated in every aspect of life, from the humblest thana to the grandest kolas. Kolas are the dances, which I mentioned earlier. The Daivas often refuse to the weary, wisdom to the seeker, and a spiritual connection to something far greater than ourselves. In the crucible of my experiences, I shed the shackles of doubt and embraced the profound truth that dwelled within the hearts of the people of Illinois. As I allowed it to sway and dance, the strings of caste, religion, and language dissolved into the essence of truth that was above and beyond everything. For in the dance of existence, where the ethereal and the earthly entangle, it is the power of belief that propels us forward, that nurtures our souls, and that connects us to the infinite. And in that belief, in the eternal sacred realm, the spirit deities shall forever find their dwelling place, their presence felt by those who embrace the extraordinary, or in the language of the Western mind, embrace the light. During the course of this book, I lived 1,000 lives that inspired me to finish this project. And these lives were not just mine, they belonged to every individual I encountered, every individual from those marginalized communities who kept this tradition alive, battling the tyrants of their time, and to the spirit deities whose stories of righteousness and revolt resonated within me. As I articulated in the first chapter of this book, it was a voice that called to me. But I didn't know what it was then. Now I know that the voice that called me was a voice of truth, of Satyam. That's it.
Speechless. It was amazing. Thank you so much, sir. Utkarsh, sir, over to you now.
Right. So I'll read a small passage from this one, Kannaki's Anklet. And this is towards the end, where Kannaki curses, the city of Madurai, right? That's quite an important point in terms of both modern times and ancient times. So, she comes out of the court and she addresses the people of Madurai and she says, "People of Madurai, my husband and I had done no harm to any of you, but this city has murdered my husband. It has robbed me of my husband ruthlessly and brutally, without giving him a chance to speak or explain. Such crimes by kings cannot be paid by the mere death of the king. He has evaded his moral and ethical duty, and his death is nothing more than the acceptance of his mistake. But the crime has divine ramifications because a judge erred in dispensing justice. He was the farmer who destroyed crops. He was the mother who murdered her own children. And he was the cow who filled her udders with poison. My hunger has not been satiated because this is the hunger of a blameless woman. My chastity and faith in my husband have led me here, and even before we realized anything, he was killed. He could not tell me his last wish. He could not meet his aged parents. He could not. But this is a crime which has to be paid for with life, and so I curse. If I have been true to my husband, and this is the curse, if I have been true to my husband, if I have not erred in love and service, then, O Lord of the flames, O Lord who devours everything in its way, devour this land of the unjust. Burn down the impious and cleanse it of the evil that has besotted it. O God of fire, O Lord Agni, I implore you to honor my request, for none shall live who has an evil heart. Saying this, Kannagi pulls out her left breast and hurled it on the street in front of her. And to the horror of all, from the spot where she hurled her breast emanated a ball of flame which stood still for a moment. The sight of the breast turning into fire shook people, for never had anybody seen anything like this. From it emanated the Lord Himself and addresses Kannagi, Virtuous lady, I have the order of turning the city to ash, and the same will be done. Do you wish to spare anybody from this plight? And Kannagi responds, Spare none but the men of scriptures, the old and infirm, women who are chaste, the children and the innocent, and the mute animals. All evil should perish, for the city needs to be cleansed. The impurity must burn and give birth to a purity that the city needs. And Lord Yagni says, Yours will be done, O epitome of chastity, for thou art virtuous, and I am at the beck and call of virtue and virtue only. Yeah.
It's very soothing, mesmerizing. So thank you so much for sharing such lovely words to all of you. Thank you so much. And yeah, this brings us to an end of our intriguing panel discussion. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jeffrey sir, Hari sir, and Utkarsh
Thank
sir
you.
for
Thank
your
you.
very insightful, empowering, soothing, insightful conversation and for your valuable time this evening. Tell Me Your Story calls for submission on the writing prompt, Echoes and Whisper, which intends to explore various noises and conversations emerging from our internal and external hemispheres. Registrations are also open for a host of workshops for new or aspiring authors. We hope to hear from you soon. Till then, stay safe, stay happy, stay together. Have a nice day and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.